It's pretty much a foregone conclusion that by the time the elections are done here in Canada, we will see some form of a foreign buyer's ban. So in today's video, I want to talk about what that might mean for the real estate market. So if you pay any attention to the polls, as per usual, you'll see that the Liberals and the Conservatives are leading the way as we head to the election, and both parties are proposing a foreign buyer's ban on real estate purchases. So the first thing I want to mention as we get this video rolling is the percentage of foreign buyers in Canada. If you look at two major markets, Vancouver and Toronto, it's somewhere around 5% of real estate purchases are made by foreign buyers, and technically a foreign buyer has their name on the contract in some sort of way, whether they're a part of a corporation or whether they're an individual. It's not a large chunk of buyers that make up the foreign buyer segment. Having said that, let's not kid ourselves. There are other capital inflows into the Canadian market from international sources, right? So foreign money is making its way into the Vancouver real estate market, whether it's written on a contract or not that this buyer is a foreign buyer. I was reading an article, BNN Bloomberg, earlier today, and I saw some really interesting points that I want to relay to you guys as well in terms of, what type of an effect will a foreign buyer ban actually have on the market? And could other countries view this as targeting them in certain ways and ultimately end up in a backfire situation for Canadians that own real estate in other areas? Now, I think for a lot of people, when they hear the term foreign buyers, they're typically thinking of buyers in overseas countries, Asian countries, China, Japan, European countries, the UK, perhaps Dubai, Saudi Arabia. But one thing that needs to be remembered is one of the largest foreign buyer countries in Canada is actually the US, our neighbors to the south. So foreign buyers, it encapsulates so many different countries. And just as the US purchases a lot of real estate in Canada, Canadians purchase a lot of real estate in the US as well. I dug into some of the numbers, and if you go back to 2010 and you look at the real estate purchases by Canadians in the US, you get a number that's close to around 450,000 units purchased in the US by Canadians. So the reason I bring this point up is if Canada is to actually impose a foreign buyer's ban, that would affect the US as well. The US is typically not a country that's just going to sit there and quote unquote take it. They have a lot of Americans that are purchasing cottages, vacation properties here in Canada, and it would not shock anyone for the US to impose some sort of penalty, perhaps in the way of a tax, in Canada's direction as well. So this could affect hundreds of thousands of Canadians that own property in the US. Think about how many people in Canada live here part-time, and then in the winter months they head down south and they live in their properties over there. This is something that could possibly affect these Canadians. Now, maybe interesting to note is the NDP is the only, we'll say, major party of the top three in Canada that's not proposing a foreign buyer ban. They, however, are proposing a foreign buyer tax, which we already see here in Vancouver of 20%. Part of the thought process, I believe, behind this, obviously, is the revenue source for the government. Here in BC, the provincial government is NDP. They collect that 20% foreign buyers tax, and now the NDP wants to roll this out nationally to obviously to gain some of that tax revenue across the country. There's also a lot of talk about how the Liberals have never been in favor of a foreign buyer ban. Now, when I look at this, I think of it in two ways. I think one of them, of course, and it's probably the obvious one, is Trudeau and the Liberals have not wanted to ruffle any international feathers. So international relations has to be at the forefront of why they haven't looked at this in the past. But I wonder if part of it as well is, the Liberals thinking that this could do more harm than good, a foreign buyer's ban, because again, we talked about that number, a foreign buyer, making up around 5% in Canada's top markets, Toronto and Vancouver. Perhaps the Liberals looked at it and said, look, the amount of disturbance we may cause internationally with our allies, our partners, is not worth banning this percentage of foreign buyers. Again, they must realize that there are inflows of capital coming into the country that are not specifically made by, a foreign buyer written on a real estate contract. So I think, it is possible that the Liberals looked at it and said, look, do we really want to cause this sort of a disturbance? And especially with the neighbors to the south, because as mentioned earlier, the U.S. is not just going to sit there and allow their U.S. citizens to have a ban imposed on them or have restrictions imposed on them in buying Canadian real estate. On the flip side, we're likely to see something happen in the U.S. as well. Another quick thing to point out is, Canadians on a larger scale, so large scale real estate investors, make up the second largest investor purchases in the U.S. So Canadians are not just on a consumer level. Canadians, organizations, pensions, they purchase a ton of real estate in the US as well. So what would happen if now the US turned around and said, okay, Canada, we're going to impose a foreign buyer ban on yourselves as well. So now we have these institutional larger investors that are unable to purchase real estate in the US, or even if the US was imposing some sort of foreign buyer tax. All of a sudden, the US real estate market becomes less lucrative for these investors, and they focus their eyes more heavily back again in Canada and create competition within Canada again. So I think one of the reasons why we haven't approached a foreign buyer tax in the past is because all of these things that could happen, not specifically in terms with our relations with overseas countries, but more specifically with our relation with the country right below us to the south of us, the US. The other thing to mention is in the Conservative plan, they are suggesting a minimum of a 2-year ban on foreign buyers who don't intend to move to Canada. And I put that in quotes because this is going to be very important. How are they going to define who has the intention of moving to Canada? What sort of a duration are they going to place on that? What if someone has an intention to move to Canada years down the road? So I think a lot of this is going to come down to implementation and how well this can get implemented by either the Conservatives or the Liberals, should either one of them win the election. So what does this all mean then for the real estate market if we actually are to have a foreign buyer ban? As I talked about earlier in the video, we see foreign money entering the market whether or not a foreign buyer is actually behind the purchase. I don't personally see that there's going to be a lot of change in prices if we do have a foreign buyer ban. A lot of people are thinking that, okay, in the luxury segment, we're going to see lower prices, there's going to be less buyers, and definitely there are sellers that are concerned about that. They are placing their homes on the market now at the higher end of the spectrum. Foreign buyers on paper, their largest product type that they tend to purchase are condos, but I could see there being some level of an effect on the high-end luxury market. Again, Vancouver is a global real estate market, but especially at that high end in that luxury segment, we may see something there. Having said all of that, I think there's actually the potential for more harm than good, depending on what happens with the response from some of these other countries, and specifically the response from the US. It'd be interesting to see whether they impose their own sort of foreign buyer ban on Canada or some sort of foreign buyer's tax on Canada. A lot of you may look at that and say, well, that's going to target the rich anyways, the wealthy who are purchasing second properties, or again, these institutional investors that are purchasing larger amounts of properties in the US. But let's not forget, if the US becomes more unattractive to these purchasers, where are they going to be looking to purchase more real estate? Here in Canada, and competing with the average consumer. So guys, if you learned something in this video, I'd love it if you could hit the like button. What that does is it sends the video out to more people who it may be able to help. Consider subscribing as well if you like these real estate videos. Again, my name's Hasan. I'm a real estate agent in the Vancouver area. If you wanted my help to buy and sell, all my information is in the description box below. Outside of that, thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to get to the polls and have your voice heard, and have a wonderful day.